There have been many advancements in medical history, and some of the biggest medical breakthroughs have been the discovery of penicillin and the discovery of vaccinations. Entire careers, innumerable dead ends, and uncountable sums of money solving health problems are abridged with the benefit of hindsight into stories of single moments and heroic individual researchers. Many of the breakthroughs of major medical discoveries of the last decade are steps on a continuum of discovery and progress, important midpoints in research and treatment. To gain a proper understanding and appreciation for the evolution of modern medicine, knowledge of ancient civilization is essential. The ancient Egyptians, like the ancient Greeks and Romans, have provided modern historians with a great deal of knowledge and evidence about their attitude towards medicine and the medical knowledge that they had. This evidence has come from the numerous papyruses found in archaeological searches. Like prehistoric man, some of the beliefs of the Egyptians were based on myths and legend. However, beliefs also came from the increasing knowledge of the human anatomy and plain common sense. When there was no obvious reason for an illness, many ancient Egypt doctors and priests believed that disease was caused by spiritual beings. When no one could explain why someone had a disease, spells and magical potions were used to drive out the spirits. Despite this use of remedies that come from a lack of knowledge, the ancient Egyptians also developed their knowledge as a result of education. Ancient papyrus inform us that the ancient Egyptians were discovering things about how the human body worked, and they knew that the heart, pulse rates, blood, and air were important to the workings of the human body. A heart that beat feebly told doctors that the patient had problems. Many foundations of modern Western medicine lie in classical Greece. Greek medicine departed from the divine and mystical and moved towards observation and logical reasoning. These ideas spread throughout the Mediterranean world and as far east as India, and their influence has remained strong in the West to this day. Not all ancient Greeks turned to physicians when ill. Many still turned to the gods. The god Apollo was consulted at a temple in Delphi, and by the 6th century BC, many turned to the god Asclepius for help. Places called Asclepia were built for those in poor health. These were like temples, and here people came to bathe, sleep, and meditate. Patients were encouraged to sleep as it was believed that during sleep they would be visited by Asclepius and his 2 daughters. A visit by these 3 was expected to cure all ailments. The most famous of all ancient Greek doctors was Hippocrates, born in 460 BC. He became known as the founder of medicine and was regarded as the greatest physician of his time. He based his medical practice on observations and on the study of the human body. He held the belief that illness had a physical and a rational explanation, and he rejected the views of his time that considered illness to be caused by superstitions and by possession of evil spirits and disfavour of the gods. Hippocrates held the belief that the body must be treated as a whole and not just a series of parts. He accurately described disease symptoms and was the first physician to actually describe the symptoms of pneumonia as well as epilepsy in children. He believed in the natural healing process of rest, a good diet, fresh air, and cleanliness. He noted that there were individual differences in the severity of disease symptoms and that some individuals were better able to cope with their disease and illness than others. He was also the first physician that held the belief that thoughts, ideas, and feelings come from the brain, and not the heart as others of his time believed. Hippocrates travelled throughout Greece practicing his medicine. He founded a medical school on the island of Kos, where he was born, and began teaching his ideas. He soon developed an oath of medical ethics for physicians to follow. The Hippocratic Oath is taken by physicians today as they begin their medical practice. Science and technology in ancient and medieval India covered all the major branches of human knowledge and activities, including medical science and surgery. Around 800 BC, the first compendium on medicine and surgery was compiled in ancient India. Hindu medicine is as ancient as Hindu civilization. Ancient India was a land of sages, saints and seers, as well as a land of scholars and scientists. Considered by many scholars to be the oldest healing science, Ayurveda is a holistic approach to health that is designed to help people live long, healthy and well-balanced lives. The term Ayurveda is taken from the Sanskrit words Ayas, meaning life or lifespan, and Veda, meaning knowledge. It has been practiced in India for at least 5,000 years and has only recently become popular in Western cultures. The contemporary form of Ayurvedic medicine is mostly derived from several sacred Indian texts, which were written in Sanskrit between 1500 BC and 400 AD. The basic principle of Ayurveda is to prevent illness by maintaining balance in the body, mind and consciousness through proper drinking, diet and lifestyle, as well as herbal remedies. Traditional Chinese medicine has been around for thousands of years. Bear in mind that apart from the recorded documents, much of what is said about the origins of Chinese medicine is more legend than history. According to the legend, the origins of traditional Chinese medicine is traced back to the three legendary emperors or mythical rulers, Fu Zi, Shen Nong, and Heng Di. The first written documentation on traditional Chinese medicine is the Heng Di Ni Qing, the Yellow Emperor's Canon of Internal Medicine. Heng Di Ni Qing is the oldest medical textbook in the world. Different opinions date the book back to between 800 BCE and 200 BCE. The textbook lays a primary foundation for the theories of Chinese medicine, which extensively summarizes and systematizes the previous experience of treatment and theories of medicine. The underlying principle of medieval medicine was the theory of humours. This was derived from the ancient medical works and dominated all Western medicine until the 19th century. The theory stated that within every individual there were 4 humours, or principal fluids: black bile, yellow bile, phlegm and blood. These were produced by various organs in the body, and they had to be in balance for a person to remain healthy. Too much phlegm in the body, for example, caused lung problems, and the body tried to cough up the phlegm to restore a balance. The balance of humours in humans could be achieved by diet, medicines, and by bloodletting using leeches. The use of herbs dovetailed naturally with this system, the success of herbal remedies being ascribed to their action upon the humours within the body. The use of herbs also drew upon the medieval Christian doctrine of signatures, which stated that God had provided some form of alleviation for every ill, and that these things, be they animal, vegetable, or mineral, carried a mark or a signature upon them that gave an indication of their usefulness. Frenchman René Laennec has been known in the scientific and medical world for his invention of the stethoscope in 1816. Born in Quimper, France, he studied medicine under the wing of his uncle Guillaume-François Laennec at the University of Nantes. He later became the head of medicine at the Hôpital de la Charité and a professor of medicine at the Collège de France before dying of tuberculosis in 1826. During this point of history, the most common means for diagnosing heart conditions was to simply place one's ear over the patient's chest to listen for murmurs, vibrations, or deep rumblings that can indicate various heart and chest problems. Laennec recognized that factors such as the patient's weight and even gender affected the results of the traditional process of chest percussion and listening. Excess fat between the outer chest and heart region made hearing the sounds within the chest cavity extremely hard to hear without amplification. In addition, placing one's head against the chest of a female patient was very awkward for both the patient and the doctor. Laennec's solution was a wooden tube with a small earpiece that, when placed between the patient's chest and the doctor's ear, the sound from the chest cavity was amplified considerably. This simple device, inspired by a child's toy, was very effective, but met considerable resistance in the medical world due to how deeply engraved the traditional methods were in clinical practice. His design was improved in 1851 by Arthur Leard and George Kaman into the binaural stethoscope used in modern medical practices. Rudolf Virchow was one of the 19th century's foremost leaders in medicine and pathology. He was also a public health activist, social reformer, politician, and anthropologist. He had a strong interest in natural science. Virchow's greatest accomplishment was his observation that a whole organism does not get sick, only certain cells or groups of cells. In 1855, at the age of 34, he published his now famous aphorism, Omnis cellula e cellula. Every cell stems from another cell. With this approach, Virchow launched the field of cellular pathology. He stated that all diseases involve changes in normal cells. That is, all pathology ultimately is cellular pathology. This insight led to major progress in the practice of medicine. It meant that disease entities could be defined much more sharply. Diseases could be characterized not merely by a group of clinical symptoms, but by typical anatomic changes. Pathologic anatomy, in addition to its great scientific merit, had tremendous practical consequences. If the physician was able to find out what anatomic changes had occurred in a patient, he could make a much more accurate diagnosis of the disease than he could in the past. This also empowered physicians to give more precise treatment and prognosis. In many of his speeches, Virchow stated that the practice of medicine in Germany should shift away from being a largely theoretical activity. He advocated for the study of microscopic pathological anatomy, for research to be performed by physicians, the importance of making systematic clinical observations, and the performance of animal experimentations. Virchow's many discoveries include finding cells in bone and connective tissue and describing substances such as myelin. While Virchow in Germany was developing the new science of cellular pathology, Louis Pasteur in France was developing the new science of bacteriology. Virchow fought the germ theory of Pasteur. He believed that a diseased tissue was caused by a breakdown of order within cells, and not from an invasion of a foreign organism. We know today that Virchow and Pasteur were both correct in their theories on the causality of disease. If one were to choose among the greatest benefactors of humanity, Louis Pasteur would certainly rank at the top. He solved the mysteries of rabies, anthrax, chicken cholera, and silkworm diseases, and contributed to the development of the first vaccines. He debunked the widely accepted myth of spontaneous generation, thereby setting the stage for modern biology and biochemistry. He described the scientific basis for fermentation, winemaking, and the brewing of beer. Pasteur's work gave birth to many branches of science, and he was single-handedly responsible for some of the most important theoretical concepts and practical applications of modern science. Pasteur's achievements seem widely diverse at first glance, but a more in-depth look at the evolution of his career indicates that there is a logical order to his discoveries. He is revered for possessing the most important qualities of a scientist: the ability to survey all the known data and link the data for all possible hypotheses, the patience and drive to conduct experiments under strictly controlled conditions, and the brilliance to uncover the road to the solution from the results. In 1928, bacteriologist Alexander Fleming made a chance discovery from an already discarded contaminated Petri dish. The mold that had contaminated the experiment turned out to contain a powerful antibiotic, penicillin. However, though Fleming was credited with the discovery, it was over a decade before someone else turned penicillin into the miracle drug for the 20th century. 12 years later, in 1940, the second year of World War II, two scientists at Oxford University were researching promising projects in bacteriology that could possibly be enhanced or continued with chemistry. Australian Howard Florey and German refugee Ernst Chain began working with penicillin. Using new chemical techniques, they were able to produce a brown powder that kept its antibacterial power for longer than a few days. They experimented with the powder and found it to be safe. Needing the new drug immediately for the war front, mass production started quickly. The availability of penicillin during World War II saved many lives that otherwise would have been lost due to bacterial infections in even minor wounds. Penicillin also treated diphtheria, gangrene, pneumonia, syphilis and tuberculosis. Though Fleming discovered penicillin, it took Florey and Chain to make it a usable product. Though both Fleming and Florey were knighted in 1944, and all three of them, Fleming, Florey and Chain, were awarded the 1945 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, Fleming is still credited for discovering penicillin. In America in the 1950s, summertime was a time of fear and anxiety for many parents. This was a season when children by the thousands became infected with the crippling disease poliomyelitis or polio. This burden of fear was lifted forever when it was announced that Dr. Jonas Salk had developed a vaccine against the disease. Salk became world famous overnight, but his discovery was a result of many years of painstaking research. After completing medical school and his internship, Salk returned to the study of influenza, the flu virus. World War II had begun, and public health experts feared a replay of the flu epidemic that had killed millions in the wake of the First World War. The development of vaccines controlled the spread of flu after the war, and the epidemic of 1919 did not reoccur. In 1947, Salk accepted an appointment to the University of Pittsburgh Medical School. While working there with the National Foundation of Infantile Paralysis, Salk saw an opportunity to develop a vaccine against polio and devoted himself to this work for the next 8 years. In 1955, Salk's years of research paid off. Human trials of the polio vaccine effectively protected the subject from the polio virus. When news of the discovery was made public on April 12, 1955, Salk was hailed as a miracle worker. He further endeared himself to the public by refusing to patent the vaccine. He had no desire to profit personally from the discovery, but merely wished to see the vaccine disseminated as widely as possible. Salk's vaccine was composed of killed poliovirus, which retained the ability to immunize without running the risk of infecting the patient. A few years later, a vaccine made from live poliovirus was developed, which could be administered orally, while Salk's vaccine required injection. Further, there was some evidence that the killed vaccine failed to completely immunize the patient. In the US, public health authorities elected to distribute the live oral vaccine instead of Salk's. Tragically, the preparation of live virus infected some patients with the disease, rather than immunizing them. Since the introduction of the original vaccine, the few new cases of polio reported in the United States were probably caused by the live vaccine, which was intended to prevent them. In countries where Salk's vaccine has remained in use, the disease has been virtually eradicated. As we look back, it is easy to see that modern medical science has indeed made incredible advances and contributions which have alleviated much pain and suffering, and will likely continue to do so in the future with advancements in stem cell research, surgical technique, prosthetics, subcellular intervention, metabolomics, and more. Despite a great deal of resistance to stem cell research outside of the medical community, advances have continued, and in most cases without the need for embryonic stem cells. Tests on mice for treatment of diabetes have shown that stem cell therapy can indeed stimulate the regeneration of lost beta cells to produce insulin. Although more wishful thinking than practical at the moment, stem cell therapy is likely to begin asserting itself as a major medical treatment for a multitude of diseases in the next 10 to 20 years. The advancement in prosthetics is almost mind-boggling, again something beyond the capability of alternative medicine. Gene therapy is coming, although it might be 10 to 20 years down the road before we see any significant number of practical applications, but they're coming. But gene therapy is just the tip of the iceberg. Metabolomics is the study of all of the byproducts produced by your body's myriad metabolic processes. These metabolites are easily found in the urine and blood and provide a wealth of information as to the state of your health. And more importantly, where your health is headed. Man is a fortunate species. Over thousands of years, our intelligence has given us tools and technology, art and science, society and civilization. We now possess a treasure house of man's great achievements.